Welcome. We have here with us today the Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Mr. Vernon Coaker. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you could begin by talking a little bit about your history. You've served both as a Minister in Government and now in the Shadow Cabinet in opposition. What do you find are the different challenges that you face being in opposition?
Well, I think the first thing to say is obviously when you're in government, you're making decisions that actually change policy. Well, obviously when you're in opposition, you're arguing about what you think about what the government's doing, but you haven't got that sense of power. So there's a very real change in terms of power and the ability to know that what you say and the decisions you make actually translate into policy. Clearly when you're in opposition, you're laying out what you think the government should be doing, or indeed in some cases you'll be actually supporting the government. But most of the time you're laying out what an alternative view and an alternative vision of the country. The second thing that is really interesting is people say, oh, you must have a lot more time now you're in opposition, you're not going to be as busy. And of course that isn't the case. If you're working hard in opposition, then it's clearly very busy, there's a lot going on. And of course alongside that, you notwithstanding the support and good support they do get, you haven't got an army of civil servants waiting for you to say what you want them to do, and looking out and finding information for you and researching anything that you might want to know to back up the decisions, and indeed sometimes writing speeches that you can change or adapt for you and so on. So you are extremely busy and you have to fend a bit more for yourself than perhaps you did when you were in government. But that brings with it a certain freedom as well, that you're not as constrained by always worrying so much about what the consequences of things will be, although of course you have a responsibility to make sure you consider that as well.
Do you think that you need different skills being in opposition, or is it very much very much part of the same kind of overall political nous?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that you need different skills. I mean, I think the sorts of skills that transfer from whether you're in government or in opposition, prioritising, thinking through decisions that you take, looking at what you might do and so on. I think, of course, what you're always trying to do, as I said at the beginning, is try to adapt and amend and bring forward alternatives, and that's often quite difficult so prioritising and thinking that through is difficult, but I think the skills are by and large transferable, and being able to communicate, to get on with people, to listen to what has to be said, to take advice, all of those things, that's true whether you're in government or in opposition.
So just a quick question on the converse. Do you think that the present government managed the transition well, going from being in opposition to governing?
Well, I think the problem, particularly to be fair to the current government, I think the difficulty they had was, of course, that you didn't have a Conservative government, or indeed a Labour government, or indeed a Liberal Democrat government. So I think the difficulty they had was actually the election result left a situation where a coalition had to be established, unless probably the Conservatives had decided that they were going to act as a minority government. So I think it was difficult for anyone to foresee and say, how are we going to plan to work together as a coalition? But the coalition agreement was established, they worked that through, and I think that they've tried to implement it. I don't agree with the policies, I don't agree with the agreement that they came to, but that's what they've tried to do. I think the problem they've had is actually that the tensions of the coalition, particularly as some of the wheels on their economic policies have come off their policy wagon, I think that's become much more difficult for them. So handling the transition, I think it's not quite like comparing how governments in the past, say the Labour government, which came in '97, how they coped with the transition from opposition to government, because it was a different circumstance. I mean, Blair always said that actually he wished he'd done much more in his first term in the 97-2001 government, and needed to have hit the ground running. I think the coalition tried to do that, and we saw that with the decisions they made around the economy and some of the other things they did around schools and policing and so on. But the policies are wrong, in my view. And as I say, it's not I don't think very easy to compare the transition of this government with previous because of the nature of what happened in terms of the coalition agreement that had to be established.
Do perhaps you'll visit your area of interest, your Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. In the area at the moment we have particularly high youth unemployment, we have a lot of social deprivation, and you still have the lingering presence of paramilitary organisations. Are you worried that this could be a bit of a fertile recruiting ground for the paramilitary organisations at the moment?
I think the first thing to say is that one of the things that I've tried to do as the Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland is to say that, of course, on policing and security we'll work with the government in terms of ensuring law and order is maintained, etc. That's an obvious point to make. But alongside that, there are of course issues that we have with the government here around the economy, and I think people need to realise that, perhaps more than they do, that big macroeconomic decisions on tax and spend are made here at Westminster, and they impact, notwithstanding the devolution settlement, they impact on Northern Ireland. So the cuts that have been made, the slowdown in the economy, the rise in youth unemployment, those are direct consequences of policies here. So we've tried to raise those, and certainly you have to say that it's like if you get an economic downturn, as there is and economic difficulties as there is in Northern Ireland, as there is in the rest of the UK, of course that's problematic. Now, there is no excuse for violence, there's no excuse for people taking to the law into their own hands, but where you get alienation, where you get unemployment, that can bring with it difficulties. And as I say, I wouldn't go as far as to say it acts as a recruiting sergeant, but certainly there are difficulties that people have when they feel alienated from a political system. Obviously, I get it in my own constituency in Nottingham. If people don't feel that actually the political system is delivering for them, then obviously that's they become concerned, they become angry, and it causes difficulties and problems. That would be the same in Northern Ireland, particularly amongst young people, and some of the consequences that have other connotations in Northern Ireland compared to the rest of the UK, and obviously that's a concern and a worry, and something that needs to be taken into account when policy decisions are made.
You mentioned that